Speaker Gingrich. You have 3 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, first of all, let me thank all of you, and in particular Senator Mint, for arranging this and organizing it. It's great to be with all of you, and it's good to be here in South Carolina. As a Georgian, you played the right teams this last weekend for me to say congratulations. And in particular, I like the USC come-from-behind victory, because I identify with teams that fumble early in the game and then still come back. So, however, I do have to point out that while USC and Clemson and the Citadel did well, my daughter and my son-in-law went to Presbyterian, and they started the season once again losing. So it's a mix. In the household, it's a little bit mixed, but for South Carolina, it was great. I am really glad to be here. I think that, if I might say, that what Dr. George began in his entire approach with the Manhattan Statement and with other things that have been going on to recenter American culture is really, really important. And the fact that Senator Mint, who's obviously done a great job nationally of putting this together, Steve King, who's an increasingly important leader in the House, I think this is very important. I want to talk very briefly about American exceptionalism and then apply it very directly to one example of how big the change needs to be. Despite the fact that our current president has managed to avoid explaining on at least 4 occasions that we are endowed by our Creator, the fact is what makes American exceptionalism different is that we are the only people I know of in history to say power comes directly from God to each one of you. You are personally sovereign. So you're always a citizen, you are never a subject. Now, the Founding Fathers wrote this because they said we hold these truths to be self-evident. This is not a philosophy, it's not an ideology, it's not a theory. It's a set of truths as they understood it about the nature of being human. That we are human within a fabric created by God. And that these rights are unalienable. That means no politician, no bureaucrat, no judge can take them away from you. Now, it's important to understand this because the gap between the America the Founding Fathers created and the system currently dominating in Washington is extraordinary. We are in grave danger of decaying from citizenship to being subjects. We're in grave danger of the center of power, of sovereignty, leaving you, the people, and going to the Washington bureaucrats. If you look at the Gibson-Qatar case the other day, where 26 armed federal agents intervened in factories to discover whether or not there was illegal Indian wood. I mean, this is bizarre. This is a system run amok. And so it's important. The one example I want to give you is the courts, because I think this is a topic that is totally appropriate for us to deal with. And I think it's very important for us to get to it, and I hope in the questioning we can.
Well, just as it happens, Speaker Gingrich, I do have a question that's going to relate to the constitutional powers of the respective levels and branches of government, and the court's very central here. The question also concerns the obligations of human life. But I'll begin with a quotation that you as an historian will find very familiar. It's from President Lincoln's first inaugural address when he was facing the court's unconstitutional decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford, in which the court usurped the authority of the elected representatives of the people on the slavery issue. And Lincoln said, if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal, unquote. Now, many argue today that we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Roe versus Wade. However, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, as you know, expressly authorizes the Congress, by appropriate legislation, to enforce the guarantees of due process and equal protection contained in the amendment's first section. So as someone who believes, as I know you do, in the inherent and equal dignity of all members of the human family, including the child in the womb, would you, as President, propose to Congress appropriate legislation pursuant to the 14th Amendment to protect human life in all stages and conditions without waiting for a constitutional amendment?
Yes. And there's a reason for this. It goes much deeper because there are 5 or 6 other issues, such as one nation under God, such as the right to have a cross on public land, There are a number of issues where the courts have now dramatically usurped their power. Let me add to your Lincoln quote. Jefferson, being written about the question of whether or not there could be a Supreme Court, wrote back, that would be an oligarchy. Think about it. We have a document. This is the center of American exceptionalism. We are a people of law. To be a people of law, you have to have a structure. The structure of the Constitution says there's a formal way to amend the Constitution. It's a very complicated process. The idea that the Founding Fathers also meant to say, oh, and by the way, by a 5-4 vote, appointed lawyers can be the equivalent of a constitutional convention is an absurdity. All of this starts in 1958 with a Warren Court assertion of supremacy, which is profoundly wrong. The Supreme Court is supreme in the judicial branch, and the judicial branch is one of the three branches. It's the third branch mentioned in the Constitution, and in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton says explicitly, it will be the weakest of the three branches. And so I think for the Congress to begin a systematic process, one part of which is to eliminate the right of the courts to review certain things. And to recognize we're going to have a big fight with the lawyer class. I mean, this is going to be a fight.
What you have in mind, Speaker Gingrich, Congress's power under Article 3 to regulate the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court?
Among other things. I also would look very carefully at Jefferson in 1802 passes the Judicial Reform Act of 1802, which eliminates 18 out of 35 federal judges. Doesn't impeach anybody. It just says this court does not meet, it will not be appropriated for, go home. Now, the judges who were going to get those jobs promptly tried to file suit, and the remaining 17 judges said to them, are you crazy? If we accept your lawsuit, Jefferson will eliminate our court. Now, I want to be clear here, I am not as bold as Thomas Jefferson. I would do no more than eliminate Judge Berry in San Antonio and the Ninth Circuit. That's the most I would go for. But let me say this, because I think this has to be part of our national debate. That's not a rhetorical comment. I believe the legislative and executive branches have an obligation to defend the Constitution against judges who are tyrannical and who seek to impose un-American values on the people of the United States.
I suspect that what's going through the minds of many of our viewers across the nation is this. Well, Speaker Gingrich is right to be concerned about judicial usurpation and overreach. That's clearly a problem. We don't want the rule of law to deteriorate into the rule of unelected lawyers. On the other hand, we need to defend judicial independence. So would your last statement be a valid warrant for concern that you're someone who doesn't respect judicial independence, the independence of the judiciary?
I respect the independence of the judiciary in judging individual cases unless the person doing the judging proves to be so extraordinarily out of the context of American life and American law that they shouldn't be there. And I think there are occasions, I mean, you can't say we have a corrective balance between the three branches, except, by the way, these two should never use it. I mean, either there's a genuine tension between the three branches and the legislative and executive have a right on occasion to correct the judiciary, or the judiciary is the dominant branch and can dictate to the rest of us. As Speaker Pelosi once said, if the Supreme Court speaks, it's the voice of God. Well, I don't agree with her.
Can I shift now to the question of marriage and another question about the Constitution related to it? We have a big debate in this in this country about the definition and meaning of marriage. It's a very important debate. There are reasonable people of goodwill on the competing sides, but it's fundamental. Should the debate in the end be resolved state by state, with each state setting its own definition of marriage, or by the Supreme Court in adjudication such as what's pending now, or by the Congress, or by a constitutional amendment setting a national standard?
I think we have to look at either, again, to the point you made, either looking at legislation involving restriction, or we have to look at a constitutional amendment. And given the current state of what's happened, I suspect you'd have to move to a constitutional amendment. But I do believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. I do believe that we have every right to defend a 3,000-year clear record that that's what marriage is. And I don't think we should be intimidated against it.
I'm out of time. Thank you.
Senator DeMint.
Newt, thanks for being here. I guess I better move this up. President Obama told us that his near $1 trillion stimulus plan, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, mortgage bailouts, all these programs would get our economy back on track, keep our unemployment below 8%, and obviously that hasn't happened. He's going to give another speech this week about his next jobs plan. What would be your proposal to get our economy moving and get people back to work?
Well, let me just say first that I've said pretty clearly that he's the most effective food stamp president in American history. And if you think about it, that's actually a tragedy. I mean, that means that millions of jobs have been killed unnecessarily, and we should all understand, this economy is in grave danger of getting worse, not getting better. I mean, nobody should assume that 9% is the bottom. And in the absence of effective activity now, not when I'm president in 2013, but now, we could end up in a much deeper problem. And I think I just say that as a starting point. Second, it's tragic that President Obama cannot learn that class warfare and bureaucratic socialism kill jobs. And it's sad that he went to Detroit. It was the perfect symbolic place to go if he'd gone there to listen. Detroit in 1950 had 1,800,000 people and the highest per capita income in the United States. Bad government has destroyed the city of Detroit. They now have fewer than 800,000 people. Over half their housing stock is unneeded, and they're 67th in per capita income. It would be wonderful if the president had gone there to learn that really bad government policies can do to America what really bad government policies have done here. So what would I do? First, I would urge the House to send you immediately the repeal of Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank is a devastatingly bad bill which is inherently corrupt and which is killing small banks, killing small business, killing the housing industry. Not a single House Republican voted for it in the first round. It would be easy for them to repeal, set the stage for a huge fight over the very nature of highly centralized bureaucratic government. Second, we need to replace the Environmental Protection Agency with an Environmental Solutions Agency. When EPA is so out of cycle that even Obama has vetoed one of their rules, it should tell you how bad the agency has become. Third, you ought to repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a destructive bill which cripples startups, cripples public health companies, and gains no particular advantage to the country. Fourth, you need a 21st century Food and Drug Administration whose job is to go in the laboratory to help the scientists get the product to the market as fast as possible so we dominate the world health market, which will be the biggest market in the world. On tax policy, you ought to say no tax increase in 2013, period. Go to zero capital gains, so hundreds of billions of dollars pour into the country to be invested. Go to a 12.5% corporate tax rate. And I say to my liberal friends, ironically, General Electric will pay more taxes at 12.5% than they're paying at 35 because it won't profit them to hire all the lawyers to avoid the taxes. They currently pay zero at 35. Fourth, you ought to go to 100% expensing so that every American farmer, every American factory has the most modern equipment in the world, so we are the most productive so we can compete with China and India and win. Fifth, you ought to abolish the death tax permanently because it is an immoral tax which says if you work, save, and do the right thing your entire lifetime, politicians have the right to take your money. I think that's profoundly wrong. We want family businesses expanding, not getting smaller. We want them focused on job creation, not tax avoidance. Finally, you need an American energy plan. Here in South Carolina, you have at least $29 billion worth of natural gas offshore, and that's almost certainly a gross underestimate. We ought to have a bill like the Webb-Warner bill, which I hope the House will pass unamended in the near future. Democratic bill, 2 Democratic senators in Virginia. It says Virginia gets to develop oil and gas offshore. 50% of the revenue goes to the federal government, 37.5% to the Commonwealth of Virginia, 12.5% to land conservation and infrastructure. Here, you could take offshore development to create jobs, take part of the royalties to dredge the Charleston Harbor to make it modern, so when the Panama Canal is widened in 2014, you're ready for it. You create jobs in Charleston, jobs offshore, you increase the wealth of the state, you increase the wealth of the country. Let me be clear. I am for more revenue through economic growth. I'm for more revenue through the development of federal lands. I'm for more revenue through an American energy policy, but I am against raising taxes.
What would you do to deal with our debt?
Well, first of all, you get, as we did when I was Speaker, and we balanced the budget for 4 straight years and paid off $405 billion in debt. Phase 1 is quit running a deficit. I mean, you can't do much about the debt until you get around to
do we need a constitutional amendment to do that, in your opinion?
I personally favor a constitutional amendment for practical reasons. A politician who has an open-ended ability to borrow money has too little incentive to say no to interest groups. But a politician who can say with a straight face, I can't do it, I can't, again, every state legislature in the country understands this. We have several speakers of the House here today, and they all understand this principle, that you can't spend more than you can take in because it's against the Constitution of your state. It gives you an automatic bias at priority setting and at modernizing. But I also say about what I believe is a really dumb idea of a super committee of 12. I mean, the whole concept is just bizarre. You have 535 House and Senate members. Why are 12 of them special? You have 217 committees and subcommittees already standing. Why do you need a new one? I would say that there are at least 6 strategies that you could develop that would get you every penny they need without getting involved in the kind of negotiating that Washington loves. Because if you modernize the government, and I'll just give you one example, go to Strong America Now. If you modernize the federal government, the people who know how to do this for business believe they can save $500 billion a year. That's 3 times the amount the supercommittee is looking for. But it requires change. It requires doing it different. And it's very hard to get Washington to slow down and learn new things.
Thanks, Newt.
Mr. Speaker, you have gone through a list of your priorities, 5 or 6 or so. And so I would ask you, if you had to select the highest priority, and as Speaker you've chosen H.R. 1, H.R. 2, and on down the line, what would be your presidential plank number 1 as the highest priority in the platform as President of the United States?
It would be the King bill to repeal Obamacare.
Got you.
Okay, now that no further questions. Well, wait a minute. I am just slightly stumped. So, I'll take you this other one, and I'll go completely from levity, which actually is serious, down to very serious.
I just signed your poster. That's why I was thinking of it.
Also, as Speaker, you've had to make those decisions, and as President of the United States, they would be more profound, they would weigh more heavily. There's a point that comes when there's no one you can share that load with. When you've taken all of the advice from counsel on both sides of an argument, you have to put that in and sum it into your morals, your knowledge base, and your intellect, and close the door in the Oval Office. How do you make that decision that is a destiny decision for the country and life and death for Americans and others?
You know, that's a very profound question. And one of the most interesting case studies in how that works is Lincoln. Lincoln in 1860 gives a great speech, and it's a very rational lawyer's speech. Lincoln in March of 1865 gives his greatest speech, his second inaugural. And it is an agonizing, painful speech, which in 702 words references God 14 times and quotes the Bible twice. I recommend everybody to someday go to the Lincoln Memorial, stand there and read that speech out loud slowly, which is how he did it. In the intervening years, 620,000 Americans had died, more than all of our other wars. And Lincoln had been driven to read the Bible every day, to pray profoundly, to ask why God was putting us through this. I think anyone who would not face the most serious questions by asking God's guidance and God's grace and asking God's help would be a person who totally misunderstood the nature of life and who would be dangerous holding a major office. So I think I would hope anyone would answer you by saying, in a truly big decision, but frankly small decisions. I mean, I find myself very often praying just before I speak, or just before. I mean, seeking God's guidance strikes me as being at the heart of whether or not you can survive in a world of danger and in a world of temptation, and in a world where evil always lurks.
Thank you. On the immigration issue, and just a previous question comes back to me, and that is that there are 50 million people in foreign countries that are in line waiting to come into the United States legally, and we allow in about a little over 1 million people a year, the most generous nation on earth by far. And yet we have 10 or 12 or more million people in here that are illegally. What, though, from that number of 1 million, is there such a thing as too many legal immigrants? And how would you define that? And how would you, would you support a merit system to identify their ability to contribute to this economy rather than familial and any other means that we have?
I think that there are two practical limitations to the number of people you can absorb. One of them is the degree to which your economy is flourishing or not flourishing. I mean, if you're in a boom period and you have the opportunity to absorb talent and absorb energy, you can, by definition, absorb more people than if you're, as we are right now, in a period of either deep recession or depression, depending on your view. Second is a question of assimilation. When you have a country which is proud of its history, which is proud of its language, which is comfortable saying to people, come to America to be Americans, you can absorb more people than if you have a country whose elites are totally confused and are prepared to give up on being an American. And so I think the whole question, you know, if we're not going to be a melting pot, we can't afford to have very many people come here. When you realize that there are over 200 languages spoken in the Chicago school system, there are over 180 languages spoken at Miami-Dade Junior College. That's why I favor English as the official language of government. We need a unifying system which says, yes, we are eager to have people come to America as they always have, but we want you to come here to be American. We don't want you to come here to be confused about how this country operates. So that's a part of it. I also think, and this is controversial, but I think we have to deal with it. I think you've got to break down the approach to immigration. You cannot pass a comprehensive law. President Bush couldn't pass one with a Republican House and Senate. President Obama didn't pass one with a Democratic House and Senate. I think you start with control of the border. And I have a very simple model, which is control of the border means 100% control of the border. I mean, you can tell, are people getting in illegally or not? Are drugs getting in illegally or not? If they're not, you control it. If they are, you don't control it yet. And I would put the number of resources necessary. There are more Department of Homeland Security people, bureaucrats in Washington, than there are people assigned to the border. So I'd be willing to take half the people currently serving in Washington, ship them to Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
I would do that. And so in the seconds left, I would ask, would you extend defense till they quit going around the end?
10 seconds.
I want 100% control of the border. The entire Texas-Mexico border is a river. Now, surely you should be able to patrol a river. Now, whether you patrol the river by building a fence, or you patrol the river by putting 650 DHS bureaucrats standing shoulder to shoulder, there are a variety of ways of doing it. And by the way, I'm going to close this thing, but it's important to get this straight. We won the Second World War in 44 months. From Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, to victory over Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan was 3 years and 8 months. 44 months. This idea that Ronald Reagan in 1986 writes in his diary, I'm signing the Simpson-Mazzoli Act because we have to control the border.
Thank you, Mr.
And we're
Speaker.
told today that people can't control the border is baloney. Thank you all very much.
House Speaker Newt Gingrich.